We're smooth 98.1 FM. Good morning and welcome to Business Express. It is time to get into everything relating to business and more. My guest is ready this morning. We're joined by Damilare Asimiyu of a Macroeconomic Strategist, Afrinvest Research and Consulting. Good morning to you, Damilare.
Yes, good morning. Thanks for having me on the show.
Now, before we dig into the conversation this morning, we'll get back to you shortly, Damilare. I would like to just let you know you can be part of the conversation this morning if you send us a WhatsApp message on 0809-444-0981. Let's begin with some of the news making the rounds in the business world in Nigeria. Let's inform you that Access Holdings PLC has announced the return of Igboje IG Imokwede as its new non-executive chairman. As also, we find now that Nigeria has hired investment banks, including Citibank, JP Morgan Chase, and Goldman Sachs, to advise it on its first Eurobond issue since 2022, according to people familiar with this matter that spoke to Bloomberg News. And the Central Bank of Nigeria, CBN, has donated 2.5 million bags of fertilizer worth over 100 billion naira to the Federal Ministry of Agriculture. So this is what business is looking like this morning. So I get over to you, Damilare Asimiyu. Please help us make better sense of the second coming or the return of Igboje Imokwede as to Access Holdings PLC right now. What does this portend?
Yeah, thank you very much for that question. Good morning once again to the team. Let me start on a solemn note, lending my voice to that of billions of people across the world who felt the pain of the loss of Herbert Wigwe and his family. So, speaking to the return of Igboje, I mean, it is in our own assessment, it is a real positive move, because if you look at what has happened at Access Bank, it has left a huge gap, a huge vacuum that requires someone who has the capability and capacity to fill and make the group to remain on course for its expansion and success. And if you look back at the story of how Access Bank emerged, yes, the bank itself was created, I think, in 1989. But the Igboje I just returning now, he and Hike, the late Herbert Wigwe, were the one who actually transformed the bank after taking over management in 1992. And Hike was the CEO even up until 2013 or so, before he handed over to, or before he left for Herbert Wigwe to take over. So by and large, he understands the vision of the bank. You understand the trajectory. So, because when someone like late Herbert Wigwe, who has a bold mind, who is visionary, and whose intention is to make access the gateway of finance in Africa, is gone. You need someone who shares this vision, someone who has that capacity. And I believe in the interim period that he will be there as the non-executive chairman. He will be able to create a more clarity on how the group should go in order to realize the dream that Wigwe and every other founding fathers of that institution have for it.
Just for a bit of clarity, when we say non-executive chairman, what does this mean?
So his role is to step in the interim, right? You recall the moment Herbert Wigwe passed on, someone was brought in as an acting CEO, so meaning that's just a stopgap measure. So because of his own capacity as one of the founding fathers, so they brought him in this capacity of the non-executive acting chairman. So he has so many roles to help the board champion their strategy, but more importantly, to lead in terms of sourcing or coming up with someone who would then take up the mantle of leadership, who will fit in that CEO role that late Herbert Wigwe was occupying. So his coming is actually very critical because he understands the blueprint of the bank. He understands the vision. So by and large, his coming is more of an interim thing. But because of his understanding of the group's ideology, their vision, is heading everything about the bank now in order to make a right move of who becomes the next effective CEO.
All right, let's move away and touch on the Eurobond plan right now. The news according to Bloomberg. Speaking, Damilare, could you just help us get a better understanding by explaining how the high interest rate environment has kept nations like Nigeria away from the Eurobond market? The last time we checked, it was in 2022. So speak to this for us.
Okay, thank you very much. So it's very simple. When interest rates environment is very high, tapping into the Eurobond becomes very risky, I will use that word, for countries in the emerging market segment, especially countries like Nigeria, for so many reasons, for negative exchange rates movement reason and economic perception. For instance, if a country in the emerging markets tap the Eurobond at a time where interest rate is very high, the moment the interest rate environment normalizes, right? There are two effects. The first one is that, one, because they raised the fund at a very high interest rate, they might struggle to repay the debt. And if you look at countries in Africa, currently there was a study by the IMF that shows that almost 65% of countries in Africa are at the risk of debt default. Why? Because what they have as reserves, external reserves, is not as strong enough to help them to sustainably meet their obligations. Of course, Nigeria is not really in that critical condition because, one, we don't have any repayment this year. I think our repayment will be next year, 1.1 billion. But if you also then look at our reserve level, it's not very convincing. So when countries are taking Eurobond at a time rate is high, it creates more liability on them. And from the perspective of exchange rate movement, I'll give a typical example. So as of June last year, between June and September last year, so when the DMO last released Nigeria last debt stock number, we did an assessment, and the assessment showed that while between January and September, Nigeria external debt only increased by 4% in dollar term. In Naira term, it increased by almost 80%. Why? Because the exchange rate movement pushed the number up. And that was why, as of before June, our total external debt was in the region of about 40-something trillion. But with the addition of ways and means and the adjustment of exchange rate effects to the external side, so our total debt liability went up to 89.9 trillion. So by and large, it is always very dangerous when emerging markets where currency is very volatile, inflation is very volatile, tap into the Eurobond market when rate is high, because it makes the repricing of their instruments in the market to be very unfriendly as market rates appreciate over time, because the instrument will not be attractive.
All right, just get back to you, Damilare. I'd just like you to know, if you want to be part of the conversation, you can let's get your message as WhatsApp on 0809-444-0981. You're on to Business Express on Smooth 98.1 FM. I've got Damilare. So Damilare, why would Nigeria be considering returning to this market? And let's also do this double up for you. We understand, according to Bloomberg, it's the amount they're heading to source for would be about around the region of $1 billion US. But isn't this such a small amount to dabble into the Eurobond market for?
The Eurobond market is a market for borrowing. It's not free money. So, there's a saying that even in Freetown, nothing is free. And so your purpose of going to the Eurobond market, we just talk about the implication of borrowing and interest rate moving against it. So your going to the Eurobond market must be purposeful. Now, if you look at the 2024 to 2026 medium-term expenditure framework for Nigeria, which actually encompasses what we have for 2024 as 2024 budget, Nigeria actually plan to tap about 1.7 trillion to 1.8 trillion externally. And yes, some of it should come from bilateral funding. but bulk of it will come from Eurobond. Because even if you look at our current external debt structure, Eurobond alone accounts for almost 35%. I think our current external debt is in the region of 41.6 billion, with Eurobond that accounts for almost 15.5. So that's almost 33 to 35%. So because of the fact that it's not just frivolous money, you have to plan. And so in the budget, we already planned 1.7 trillion borrowing this year externally. And if you look at the current official exchange rate, I mean, we taking external borrowing higher than 1 to 1.5 billion this year. May also not speak well of our fiscal status, of our fiscal stability, because we already have a debt profile that is huge. I just mentioned that the external debt component is about 41 billion already, which account for almost 38% of our debt mix, the other components locally. And even if you look at our debt strategy document, the debt strategy document suggests that our external debt should not exceed 40%. So adding this one to the level we have, then combining it with the domestic component that's in the region of 50 trillion, we even don't have the headroom actually to be reckless in the Eurobond market.
Okay, I see that. All right, let's get on to this next one regarding interest rates, which is if the U.S. Federal Reserve were to cut its benchmark rate at its next meeting, would Nigeria benefit from this rate movement in pricing upward?
Absolutely, absolutely. So what determines interest rate that lenders get? I mean, when you give out your money in the debt market, you are lending to collect both principal and interest later. So what constitutes interest rates is a function of about 5 things. There's what we call risk-free rate, which is like constant in the equation. So you have interest rate equals risk-free rate plus other risk premium. The other risk premium could be currency risk premium, liquidity risk premium, repayment premium, inflation premium, and what have you. But the one that is always constant is risk-free rate. And what is risk-free rate? Risk-free rate is the rate at which an entity that is presumed that will not default on its obligation can pay out. And the entity that represents a risk-free issuer anywhere in the world is the government. So the US Fed is a representative of the US Fed, which the US government. So if the Fed rate, which is the risk-free rate, is going down, so it means that if before the interest rate is supposed to be 2 plus 1 plus 1 plus 1 to make 5, the moment the 2 there goes down, then it means you won't have up to 5 again, because the other risk premium might not change depending on your economic status, because people will still feel that your inflation is that, your exchange rate is that. But at least the risk-free rate component there is going down. So it will affect the total value of what constitutes rate at the end of the day. So by and large, that might actually help Nigeria to also be able to raise either at the level that Ivory Coast raised in January, or perhaps slightly lower, because Ivory Coast has a better credit rating than us. But again, with Nigeria going to the market at the time you think rates should go down, then our pricing should be more decent.
We can only pray that, yes, let the benchmark, let that happen. There should be a cut if they meet eventually. But we have just 2 more items to wrap it up, because we see the timing already. But let's just finish them up. Now, so speaking of interest rates, the latest Treasury bill auction in Nigeria sees that the 364-day bill at 21%. There's also been a bond auction announced by the debt management or first DMO with the rates at 18% and 19%. Are these 2 rates attractive in your view?
Relatively attractive. If you look at where we are coming from, barely a year ago, slightly above that, our Treasury bill was clearing at about 6%, when inflation was already in the region of 18%. So meaning that negative return was in more than 10%. But now you have inflation at the region of 30%, and you are offering Treasury at 21 point something percent, which puts real return or effective yield at about 26%. So it's more better, it's more market reflective than what we have. Yes, the goal of everybody is to have a positive real return, but that is difficult to achieve now anywhere in the world because of the financial situation. I think the CBN, the new management, is actually walking the talk, and I think we're getting there.
Cardoso's team, then that looks like a flower being dropped at their doorstep this morning by Damilare. But before they pick it up, final item now. This is fertilizer issue, and let's see how it's good for the farming business. What do you make of the CBN's recent donation, or that's amounting to about 100 billion naira worth of fertilizer for distribution to farmers?
Well, I wish they provided us enough information about why they're doing that. But my suspicion is that the current CBN is just clearing its house. I want to believe this fertilizer might be some of the ones that were procured under the Anchor Bora program or Mayfairly. So instead of it wasting, they actually channeling it to the right people to leverage. But it's actually a good one. Now, it won't produce an immediate gain because it takes time for agricultural product to grow. But at least for a medium to long-term gain, that is a good move. And I think it's just to clear their house because this current CBN governor has said they're not going to dabble into quasi-fiscal activities like the Mayfi administration did then. So I think it's a good move. Even in other major markets, you see the government intervening and they're going through the right channel. They're giving this to the Agric Ministry, which have records of active players in that segment, unlike the Anchor Bora, where even a trader will apply as an anchor borrower and get money. And I mean, recovery of those loans have been very, very difficult now that they have actually assigned commercial banks to help them go after those that benefited from that money who never thought they would repay it.
All right, that's all we can take, and your tray is clear, ready for business. But let's look at some of the messages that's here for you. Got Tayo's message. It says, it's a welcome development by Access Bank. He's eminently qualified as talking about IG Mokode and qualified as founder to steady and chart the company's course. A huge emotional return for the Nigerian banking. I feel like it's a solid favor to a friend. Rest on Wigwe is how Tayo puts it. Federal government is just borrowing Eurobond. How do we pay back financial recklessness for the administration? Then Oluboroko's message is waiting, and he says, well, does this imply that the woman isn't capable of leading the bank? Yes. Damilare, you said it, there was someone who was appointed. So why is IG now looming in the background? What does this imply? What does it say?
We actually cannot preempt what the final decision of the board will be. So when something like that happens, you need someone to first step in. And the person stepping in there will step in initially as a stopgap measure, as acting. So because the decision of making someone a CEO must be a collective decision of the board, and the board could not hold that time. The period is short, so they need to just put someone in acting position. They might actually still make her the effective CEO, but that is what corporate governance entails. You have to put someone in acting capacity briefly, pending the time the board will meet and make the decision and decide who will champion the cause of the bank. I mean, she might have the capacity and the vision. We have a lot of CEOs who are female in Nigeria and are doing exceptionally well.
Okay, so we'll find one message coming in from your name. Well, this message here relates to the non-executive capacity of IG as it returns to Access Holdings. And it says, that simply means not involved in the day-to-day operations of the holding company, like a full-time employee. That's just putting some clarity into IG's role as it returns once again. Then our final message, Gilbert Musa from Festac. On the CBN fertilizer donation scheme to farmers, we commend this move. But first things first, to maximize food crop production, we need to ensure security of our farmlands first. Well, that's how we sum up our Business Express this morning. We want to say a big thank you to our special guest this morning, Damilare Asimiyu, Macroeconomic Strategist, Afrinvest Research and Consulting. Thank you for your time. Have a great Thursday morning.
Thanks for having me on the show.